Import-export is the quickest way to bring in transactional and non-transactional items in bulk when using an ERP system with which we may not integrate with. When logged into your CashFlowIQ account, you will navigate over to the settings page. Once on the settings page, you will go ahead and click on the Import-Export tab. Here, you'll see quite a few headers that can be imported into CashFlowIQ. However, for the purpose of this call, we're going to focus on three main templates. That's our vendors, our chart of accounts, and our bills. Now, we're going to start with the non-transactional items first, which are the vendors and chart of accounts, and then we'll finish by bringing over some bills. So just to go ahead and get started, we're going to click on that import. Now here, you're going to see the downloadable template. I'm going to go ahead and download that template so you guys can see what that looks like. Oh, sorry, looks like I opened it twice. We're going to go ahead and just close one of these out. And I'm going to stretch it out, make it a little bit bigger so you guys can see a couple more rows. All right, now when you look at this template, you're going to see a lot of headers, right? You're going to see vendor name, zip code, all sorts of things. Keep in mind, the only mandatory field on this template is the vendor name. It is a required field. Now you could simply just copy and paste your vendor list names right here and do the import. However, that is not what we recommend. If you do just the vendor name import, at some point when you choose to pay that vendor, you will have to do a manual update, whether going into their account and manually updating it or re-uploading this template with mailing information or bank details. So what I'm going to show you is we've created a template from our side that you can use. Now you can request this from your banker before your onboarding. They can provide this to you, and this kind of highlights what are the recommended fields, what are the mandatory fields, and what are optional. So I'm going to go ahead and open that template up so that you guys can see it. This is the template that we've created on our end. As stated, the red field is mandatory, the mustard field is the recommended field, and the green field is the optional field. The red field, of course, is the vendor name. The mustard field is that address and that email address. Now, although not mandatory, we do recommend that you fill out this section. If you're going to pay them via check, it's just easier if you enter their mailing information if you have it when uploading the vendor profile. And if you choose to maybe pay them via ACH, we would require an email address so that we can send them an invite to enter their bank details. So that's why these are recommended fields. Now, when you're downloading the template from your ERP system, it might include a couple of other fields. There are some ERP systems that have vendor ID as a required field, so you have the option of entering the vendor ID. The name on check is simply if you have the vendor that you're paying and maybe the name of the payee is different than the vendor name, you could add that in here. Company name, same thing. Maybe they operate off of a DBA. So you would enter the DBA name here and the vendor name that you have listed under vendor name. Tax ID is a place where you can come in and enter that vendor's tax ID information. And then that 1099 vendor slot is where you can write yes or no. Yes, they are a 1099 vendor. Oh, no, they're not. And that just helps if you need to run a report at the end of the year of who your 1099 vendors are and aren't. Once you have this filled out, this is what you would import into our platform. However, once you're enrolled, if you do choose to move forward with the import-export process, you can simply request this template from your banking team and they can provide this to you prior to your onboarding call. For training purposes, we're going to go ahead and work off the template that we downloaded. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out now. And then from here, I'm actually going to go ahead and show you guys, a list of the vendors that we downloaded from our ERP system. So when you go into your ERP system and you download the vendor template, it's going to provide a lot of information. It would look something like this. Again, the formatting is a little bit different because I customized it to fit this template, but I'm going to go ahead and open that. It would look something like this with the vendor names and the addresses, maybe a ton more information, right? But the goal is to go in here, copy that vendor name from the vendor list, and then we're just going to paste that into our template. And then we're going to do the same for the address, since I have that information on here. Just going to go ahead and paste that into the first address line. Now, if you notice, as I'm copying and pasting, some of this information is not in here. Some of these fields are blank, and that's okay. You may not have the address for every single vendor on file. This is so that you can add that address for those that you do. Since it's not a mandatory field, it'll allow you to leave empty columns. Now, if this were the vendor tab, it would not allow you to leave that blank, right? Vendor name, as stated, is required. So every field on the vendor column has to be filled out. But since these are all optional, you can go ahead and enter this information if you have it, or leave it blank if you don't. Now that we're done copying and pasting, I'm just going to close this template out. And then the template that we have open, I'm going to go ahead and save this as a CSV file. We do require that everything that we upload be uploaded in CSV format. And once I've saved it, I'm going to go back into my CashFlowIQ account. I'm going to choose that file. And I'm going to hit continue. So the first time that you do an import, it's going to bring you to this default mapping page. And there's a couple of things that you always want to make sure that are active on this page when importing. So if you're using the vendor name, you want to make sure that that says vendor name. If your template has vendor IDs, you want to make sure that this says vendor ID. If I click on this tab, there is an ignore button. Sometimes when doing the default mapping at first, you will see ignore on some of these columns. You want to make sure that if they are included in your template, that you remove this ignore and you actually map it to the correct header. The reason why is because if you enter vendor IDs into your template and you choose ignore, even if they're on your template, those vendor IDs will not come over. So you just want to make sure that everything matches up. In this case, I want to make sure that the vendor name's there, that the address line that I'm using is there as address line, the city, the zip. If I'm using email as well. So once I'm done here, I'll go to the bottom of this page and we have to give this a name. So I'm just going to give it a name for now. And then if this was the template that you wanted to use moving forward, you could make this template your default for any imports that you do moving forward. However, if maybe you're going to format the template a little bit different next time, you don't want to make this your default profile. So for, again, the purposes of this call, we're just going to go ahead and uncheck that box. And then we're going to hit save. So here you're going to see all the vendors that you're creating. This is what you want to see, right? These are new vendors, so you want to see these in green. You want to see all the information that you put on that spreadsheet shown on here. If by chance you were doing a mass update, you'd want to see vendors to update showing as 11. And what I mean by mass update is if you were to download this spreadsheet again, maybe add an email address to all of these, when you went back to import, we'd want to make sure that it showed update and not create, right? Because we don't want to duplicate these files. So in this case, this looks perfect. These are all new vendors. So we're just going to hit continue. And that would be it. We're just going to wait for this to say success. Once this shows success, you're going to see the vendor templates over on your vendor profile list. So anything that you added here will show up on the vendor tab. And from there, you're ready to pay them. Just waiting again, one more minute until this says success. Okay, perfect. Now we're going to move on to the chart of accounts. As stated in the beginning of the call, I said non-transactional items are super important. If you are using chart of accounts, if you know that you are going to be splitting your bills or you want your bills that you import to show the chart of accounts, you're going to want to download this. So I'm going to have you click on the downloadable template. And then again, I'm going to just kind of make this a little bit bigger. So we're going to add a couple columns here. And on here, there are two required fields. One is the name and one is the type. However, this one does require a bit more work. You're going to enter the expense type. We have a very specific formatting that we require in order for you to be able to upload this information into our platform. I'll give you a good example. Some people write their expense account as expenses. We don't use expenses. We use a different sort of format. There is a support article that I have everyone pull up before they import their chart of accounts. Once you've enrolled in your CashFlowIQ account, you'll have access to the support center, and you're going to be able to access this chart of accounts. So you're going to see that the name, of course, like I said, is a mandatory field. It has to be 250 characters or less. If you create a company name, an account name, and it's a little bit longer than 250, you will get an error message. But what I really want to focus on is that tricky part, which is the account type. So here, This is also a mandatory field, but as you can see over here on the right, it says exact match with one of the expected values. Can't have a space. It has to be an exact match to this listed here. Now, this is my example. We use expense. Maybe you use expenses. So when you're importing this information, if your account says expenses, you would have to change it to expense. Same thing with accounts payable. You may use accounts payable. However, you might have it spaced out. It has to be all one word, capital A, capital P. It has to be a perfect match. If this is not a perfect match, you will get an error message telling you that it's not a correct value, and you will have to format the type to fit one of these. With that being said, I did create a chart of account template using this formation. I'm going to go ahead and share that one with you guys. So once I go into my ERP, I download my chart of accounts. It would look something like what I'm about to pull up, but I've gone in and I've done the formatting to fit the formatting exactly as it's supposed to be on that article, right? So I've changed expenses to read expense. I've made everything one word. And then what I do from here is I would just copy the name and paste it onto the correct template. Same thing, I included account numbers, not mandatory. But if you use account numbers and you want those reflected, you're going to want to enter those account numbers in here and then the type. So remember, just type and name are the only two mandatory fields. If you want to add a description, you can add a description as well. That will come over. I've just added these three for training purposes. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to save this template now as a CSV as well. And then we're going to go and we're going to import this information into our CashFlowIQ account. We're going to choose that file that we just uploaded. We're going to hit continue. And again, this is what you want to see. You want to see that it's creating new ones. These are not in the system yet. We're doing a mass upload. So it's just bringing them over. It's showing you the account number and it's showing you the type as well as the name for that GL account. So we're going to hit continue here. And again, we just want to wait for that success tab. Your chart of accounts, if you do go to the settings, will show up under your accounting chart of accounts tab. Go back to import export history. Just want to see if this has been completed. It's been completed. You'll see success. So now that we've entered the non-transactional items, we are actually going to be able to enter the bills now, because once we upload this bill, it's going to match not only the vendor name, but the chart of account that we actually categorize it under. So we're going to go to that bills import tab. Again, another downloadable template. We're going to select that template. And we're going to stretch this out a little bit. So this one is a little bit different than the other ones, just because there are a couple of mandatory fields. They are the vendor name, the invoice number, the invoice date, the due date. We're going to go over to the bill line item amount, and that's where we're going to stop for now. And here under bill line item amount, we're going to enter the amount of the invoice. However, if you're using chart of accounts, there are times where you need to split transactional expenses. So here you could go ahead and let's say that you had an invoice for, I don't know, $1,000, and maybe 500 of it went to hotel, 500 of it went to food and beverage. So you wanted to go ahead and create those two line items. You would have to enter that invoice twice on the spreadsheet. So you'd enter it in line 1 and line 2. You would enter the same invoice number, the same invoice date, the same due date. Here, you would split up those costs. So if the first line item is supposed to be 500, you put 500 here. If the second one is also 500, you put 500 there. If it was 300, whatever the total was of the whole invoice, that's where you would split this. Then you'd have to go all the way to the end of this spreadsheet. And under bill line item order, because you're splitting this into more than one expense, you would have to enter line item order 1, line item order 2, because we're breaking that invoice into 2 expenses. So once you've done that, that bill would be good to go. Now, if there was just a bill that maybe was $1,000, but you weren't coding it to different accounts, you could simply put the line item order here as 1, because what we're saying is that the line amount total on the other line is going to just be added to one line. It's not going to be split amongst different lines. I did create a template for this one as well. I'm going to share that one with you. Now, your ERP system may not export it this way. So if it doesn't export it with the 1 line item or the 2 line items, you will have to come in here, and then you will go ahead and you'll create the vendor name. You'll copy and paste the vendor name, but you'll have to copy and paste it twice, maybe 3 times, maybe 4, depending on how many times you're breaking that invoice up. If you notice here, this one has the same invoice date, same due date, same invoice number, same vendor. And if you go over to the bill line item amount, you're going to see that's 450 and 450, totaling 900. I've gone ahead and selected the correct GL accounts. And then if you go all the way to the end of the spreadsheet, you'll see that here, I added line 1 and line 2 because I'm splitting this bill. The third bill, however, only has the 1 line item order. And why? If you scroll back to the left, you'll see that I am just saying that this $700 is just going on 1 line item. So this is where you have to do a little bit more work as well when you're bringing in those bills, especially if you're using chart of accounts and you want to make sure that it's split into expenses. Keep in mind though, this is not a mandatory field either. You don't have to enter chart of accounts in the import export if you don't want to. If you don't use chart of accounts, the line item account name is not mandatory. The account number is not mandatory. You would just put the line amount here, the total of the bill on this line, and then your line item order would always be 1 because you're not going to split this into any chart of accounts or any expenses. So it's not going to be mandatory. But again, if you go to the end of this template, the line item order will always be 1. This might sound a little daunting, but remember, if you do decide to go with the import export option, we help you through the onboarding process. So we will guide you through this so that your bills come in correctly. For now, I'm going to go ahead and save this one as a CSV. And again, I'm going to go ahead and choose that file that I just saved. And then I'm going to hit continue. And same thing here. It's creating 3 new bills, right? These are my vendors. This is the invoice number. Keep in mind, same invoice number. We're just splitting this one in 2. And here's my 3rd invoice. And then you're going to see the line item amount for each line. You're going to see the account name, the account number that we use for the chart of accounts. And this is where you would just simply hit continue. And again, we want to wait for this to say success. Once this shows success, you will see these in your outgoing bills tab on the left. And from there, all you have to do is pay. Now, just like I discussed importing, there is exporting. And once you start having activity in the account, if you go back to import export, you may want to export something. You may want to export your bills. You may want to export your vendors. Let's do bills here for example. When you reach out to your ERP team, you might want to import this into your accounting software. They might have a way that they want it formatted. They might have specific fields that they require. Our export is going to have all fields. So if you want to customize one, you can always export with filters. You can add additional filters here. So maybe they require the invoice date. Maybe they require the due date. You can just export with these particular bills. You can also just export new bills only, right? You can also filter, maybe you've done a report last week, so you only want to focus on something from this month. This is where you can come and do all of this. Again, this is more for when you're exporting and you want to upload this information into your ERP. You always want to make sure that you customize the template that you're exporting to have the information that's needed in your ERP. Sometimes information that your ERP requests might not be part of our export, but if it is, this will help you have that template, an easier format for you to copy and paste onto your account. Now, if you hit the back arrow here, or you actually go back to import export, and you hit that bills export again, you can, like I said, export all or export with filters. If you export all, it'll just export every single bill. It's not going to just export the newest bills. It's going to export your bill history. So keep in mind, you always want to use certain filters. We can even open this file so you can see kind of what that would look like. You can see there's just a lot of information on here, right? So you'll see posting dates, you'll see if an approver was assigned, you'll see invoice, GL posting dates, exchange rates if you're using, multi-currency. So keep in mind, like I said, there are certain ways for you to export information. All of this may not be needed in your ERP system. So it's best once you export this that you create a customized template specific for the ERP system you are using. With that being said, that does conclude the basic training for the import-export setup. If you have any additional questions, please reach out to your banking team, and thank you for your time.